Let's do a deep dive on this New York Times article about an illegal immigrant and a man who lives in Minnesota, who has spent, as the New York Times puts it, 4 decades in rural Minnesota without ever getting into trouble. Here's the article. It's up on the screen right now. And if you're watching this, I want you to pay attention to the framing. The headline here is 2 men, 1 identity. They both paid the price. That's what we're starting with off the top. 2 men, 1 identity. They both paid the price. This is a New York Times article that was published on Sunday, a very long story, a deep dive with some, by the way, I'll say it, truly fascinating, excellent, deep reporting into the case of Dan Kluver. Again, he is a father in Minnesota. Quote, he prided himself on a life built around dependability and routine, working at the same factory where his father once did, and spending his weekends coaching baseball and teaching Sunday school. He had never fired a gun or smoked a cigarette or missed a payment or been arrested. Well, what happens to Dan Kluver? Of course, he pays the price, but it starts with the story of him getting pulled over in downtown Olivia in Minnesota and having to explain to this officer that basically he has had this long saga of identity fraud. That, by the way, in the article we learned from the New York Times, government estimates say at least 1 million migrants right now, illegal migrants, are using fraudulent or stolen social security numbers. That's the government estimate. 1 million people are dealing with this. And the story goes on to outline the many logistical, administrative, and serious personal, professional challenges that have hit this hardworking American citizen from Minnesota over the years. And I'll say it's pretty damn good reporting in the case of Dan Kluver from Minnesota. Here's a quote from him, though. It's like I've lost all control over who I am. And we're about to find out more and more. As the New York Times writes, he traced 15 years of records and found more tax documents listing unfamiliar jobs at a cement plant in Kansas, a paper mill in Tennessee, a construction company in Ohio, a cereal factory in Nebraska, and a dog food plant in Missouri. Then we learn here about the other Dan Kluver, who, quote, had earned more than his own salary at a local sugar beet factory, which pushed the total income under his Social Security number into a higher tax bracket as the debt started to mount. Twice he'd contacted law enforcement and filed an identity theft report. I'm sorry, this is the same Dan Kluver. The way that the story shifted there was confusing. But again, this is still the guy from Minnesota who had twice contacted law enforcement, filed an identity theft report with the feds, waited for relief while the IRS was docking his annual tax returns, garnishing paychecks, and he's paying thousands of dollars to fight this. Then a few months before he got married back in 2012, his wife decided to pay off the balance, quote, emptying her savings and sending in a check for $6,000. The relief lasted until the next tax season when a new bill arrived, this one for $22,000. And again, we've still got some good reporting happening here with the Minnesota Dan Kluver. Now, let's go to the other Dan Kluver, Romeo Perez Bravo, who's 42 years old. He's a Guatemalan immigrant who, quote, had spent most of his adult life working under borrowed identities. So as the New York Times writes, at the start of 2025, he was preparing for another graveyard shift in St. Joseph, Missouri, lacing his work boots in the darkness of his drafty rental while his wife and 5 children slept. He packed their school lunches for the next day, drove to their dog food factory, and gathered with his coworkers to say their nightly prayer. Then he swiped his badge to begin another 12-hour shift as Daniel Kluver, sinking it deeper into an identity that wasn't really his own. You know what we go on to learn about this man, Romeo Perez Bravo, known professionally as Daniel Kluver? We learn that this man had been deported since he first entered the country so this was 2005, 2008, and 2009. He has been deported 3 times. 3 times. He is, and this is important, an economic migrant. The story says it right off the bat. He came to the United States from Guatemala to make money. Here it is, to help earn money for his family, traveling alone to join his father in Marshall, Minnesota. He hiked out of the Guatemalan highlands, rode atop a freight train for 3 weeks across Mexico, nearly drowned in the Rio Grande, and took a Greyhound to Middle America, where life somehow felt harder. 3 deportations. We learn in the story this man had multiple DUIs, multiple children who are now U.S. citizens. He was listed, Dan Kluver himself was listed in a wrongful death lawsuit. Why? Because Romeo Perez Bravo, was in a car crash where his car malfunctioned and a man was killed. An elderly man was killed. He was riding a trike with his 9-year-old granddaughter. We then go to find out he was sheltered by a church. Dan Kluver, not Dan Kluver, Romeo Perez Bravo, was sheltered by a church. That's what this article tells us. And this article is not a scathing indictment of Perez Bravo's predation on a hardworking American citizen, nor the system that enabled Perez Bravo to, for years, be deported 3 times and be one of apparently 1 million illegal migrants who are using fraudulent or stolen social security numbers, while American citizens have to have their paychecks garnished, spend thousands of dollars to fight something that they did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. Talk about the process being the punishment. They did nothing wrong to deserve this. And the New York Times has the audacity to phrase this as just a fair and balanced human interest story. There is no balance in this story. Perez Bravo was not fleeing violence. He wasn't a legitimate asylum seeker. He was one of many people who broke the law on multiple occasions, had DUIs, putting American citizens in danger, and then gets treatment from the New York Times, gets to stay in the country for years and years until Trump comes along, and gets treatment from the New York Times where the headline says 2 men, 1 identity, they both paid the price. As though him getting potentially deported now after 15 years of stealing this man's identity is just paying the price. Paying the price. No, one person really paid the price in this situation, and it's the real Dan Kluver. And this is what people have been begging the, quote, mainstream media to cover for years, because people knew this was happening. When you have, right now in 2025, some 1 million people dealing with these identity theft cases from illegal migrants, people knew because it was happening to them. And the corporate press was paying very little attention to it. And I went and pulled these numbers. This is from ICE. Towards the end, this was the summer of 2024. There's all kinds of research about the criminal rate of people who are in the country illegally. I'm not even going to get into that. You can read the debate between the pro-immigrant Cato Institute and the sort of strict immigration think tanks. You can go and read all of those till the cows come home and enjoy. I'm not talking about that right now. Why? Because we know, according to these numbers, that in 2024, 62,231 non-citizens with criminal convictions for assault currently were not detained by ICE and were released. This is on their non-detention docket, again, 2024. 62,000. About 43,000 have pending assault charges. They were on the non-detention docket, meaning they were not detained. The agency currently is holding, according to News Nation, this was in 2024, 2,300 non-citizens who have been convicted of assault and about 1,500 who have pending charges. The agency has also released about 16,000 who have been convicted of sexual assault, about 57,000 non-citizens who were convicted of drug possession, and 2,500 who have been convicted on kidnapping, according to the letter. I crunched some numbers on my own, and there are about 7 convictions, criminal convictions, of illegal migrants on DUIs a day, if we're using the numbers from last year. About 7 a day. People who are not supposed to be here, who are putting American citizens in danger because of the Biden administration, particularly the Obama administration before the Biden administration. This is not a victimless crime at all. And it was covered like one. Continues basically to be covered like one. I don't think this New York Times piece, is guilty of covering it like it's totally a victimless crime, because here they talk about how the real Dan Kluver was indeed a victim. But even in doing that, they fill out, this genuinely interesting and dimensional story about Perez Bravo. I don't in any way whatsoever fault them for including the details of this man's life, which are interesting and reflective of how many people who are here illegally have built these lives where children could potentially go without a parent at a moment's notice because the parents knew they were always living in precarity and decided to have children that would always be at risk of losing their parent, because the politics of a country shift and people in the country decide, no, we're not going to let people with 3 freaking illegal entries, multiple DUI convictions, stay in our country. Sorry, we're not doing that anymore. We're not doing that anymore. So in that sense, even when they're trying to create this semblance of balance, it's still wildly imbalanced. These are the circumstances that I would argue the article completely downplays. This story should have been done 30 times a year by every corporate media outlet. There should have been one of these stories every single week in every news outlet for the last however many years. And it should have been a whole lot tougher on the system and on the people who have plenty of agency themselves and are economic migrants again. We're not talking about Cuban refugees in many of these cases who fled Castro or fled the current government and got that sort of mythical romantic 1 foot on Florida soil and were rescued from communism and became model American citizens. We're talking about a man who broke our law multiple times, is now in a wrongful death lawsuit over the death of somebody, entered the country illegally 3 times, and has a string of DUIs. Well, what is a church doing sheltering someone? It's described as a, quote, immigrant church. You're sheltering somebody who is, at the time you're sheltering him, making the life of an American citizen a living hell, forcing him to pay money that should be going to his children, maybe to his own church, to his own community, to the government, because someone is illegally preying on him. Laws are important. They mean something, and you certainly don't just get to break the law because you have a sob story, which in this case, I don't even know that you can describe this as a sob story, because this is a man who entered the country illegally 3 times, committed multiple driving infractions, serious driving infractions, and was preying on an American citizen via identity theft for years and years and years. Not a sob story. Do you all know what I'm thankful for this Thanksgiving? You're gonna know right away what I'm thankful for. It's obviously masa chips. There's really only one option here. But we all love Thanksgiving and the holidays because it kind of gives you a chance to go back to the basics and eat real food together as a family. And today's sponsor, Masa, is part of the real food movement. So important. Masa chips contain just 3 ingredients: organic corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow, which is delicious. With Masa, you'll feel satisfied, light, and energetic with no crash, bloat, or gross, sluggish feeling afterwards. You definitely don't want that after holiday snacking. Personally, my favorite flavor of Masa is lime. I love the spicy flavor. So that's the habanero. I love the churro flavor for dessert. But if you love Masa, then you'll also love Vandy Crisps, because speaking for myself, I also really love Vandy Crisps. Vandy, Masa's sister company, makes the most delicious 3-ingredient potato chips I've ever tasted. My favorite flavor is smokehouse barbecue. I really love also the original flavor. I'm like almost embarrassed by how much I love masa and Vandy crisps, as you can tell. So if you're looking for the best Black Friday deal on masa, Masa always offers our audience a Black Friday level offer of 25% off on their first purchase. So if you use code AFTERPARTY for 25% off your first order at masachips.com or at vandycrisps.com, you get that discount, or you can simply click the link in the video description or scan the QR code to claim this delicious offer.